What would you do if your own father called you worthless, threw you into a locked carriage, and shipped you off to die in monster territory? Most people would break, but this boy, he turned that exile into the greatest second chance the world had ever seen. Thor Reguse was born into the Dulgarian Empire as the eldest son of Duke Barga Reguse. Noble blood, a powerful family name, a mansion that stretched across an entire hillside. On paper, he had everything. In reality, he had nothing that mattered to the people around him. In this empire, strength was the only currency anyone respected. Swordsmanship, offensive magic, raw destructive power, that was what made a man worthy. Thor had none of it. No combat skills, no attack spells, not even a flicker of elemental flame. The only thing he could do was alchemy, the ability to reshape and repair physical objects using magic. His father looked at that talent the way a king looks at a broken shield, useless and embarrassing. For years, the Duke treated Thor like a stain on the family name. Servants whispered behind his back, siblings pretended he didn't exist, and his father never once looked him in the eye with anything but disgust. By the time Thor turned 13, he made a decision that most kids his age would never have to face. He left the mansion on his own and took a job as a low-level civil servant in a government office. No fanfare, no goodbye dinner, just a boy walking out of a house that never wanted him. In that dusty little office, Thor finally found peace. He used his alchemy to repair broken equipment, manage inventory, and keep things running smoothly. Nobody praised him for it, but nobody insulted him either. And for Thor, that silence was a kind of freedom. But peace never lasts for people the powerful have already marked as disposable. One morning, soldiers wearing his father's crest kicked open the office door and dragged Thor back to the Duke's mansion by force. The reason was simple and cruel. The Emperor had demanded a hostage be sent to the demon territory as part of a fragile peace treaty, and the Duke saw the perfect candidate, a son he wouldn't miss. In the eyes of the Empire, Thor was a disposable sacrifice, a body to fill a political requirement. His father didn't even bother pretending to care. At the mansion, servants openly mocked him, telling him he was better off dead than living as a hostage among monsters. The Duke himself couldn't even look at Thor as soldiers tossed his son into a locked carriage, heading north. 10 days of rattling wheels and cold darkness lay ahead of him. But inside that carriage, something important happened. Thor didn't cry, and he didn't give up. He found a metal spoon tucked beneath the seat cushion and started reshaping it with his alchemy. Slowly, quietly, turning it into a tool he could use to escape. He knew the Imperial soldiers escorting him were terrified of demons, and he planned to make his move the moment they reached the border. When the carriage finally stopped at the edge of a dark forest, the soldiers were shaking. They fired a signal arrow into the sky and waited, gripping their weapons with white knuckles. For massive minotaurs stepped out from between the trees. Each one towered over the tallest soldier, their horns curving like crescent moons above their broad shoulders. The Imperial guards nearly dropped their swords, muttering insults about savages under their breath while trembling from head to toe. But Thor noticed something none of them did. The Minotaurs were unarmed. Their hands were raised, palms open, showing they carried no weapons and meant no harm. Then a small figure stepped forward from behind them. A petite girl in a maid outfit with silver hair and pointed ears, an elf named Mabel. She bowed deeply, introduced herself as a guide sent by the Demon Lord, and welcomed Thor with a warm smile. The contrast hit Thor like a wave. His own people, the ones who shared his blood and his language, had thrown him away like garbage. And here were creatures the Empire called monsters, bowing to him with more respect than he had ever received in his entire life. Disgusted by his own soldiers' cowardice and rudeness, Thor stepped away from the guards and introduced himself with dignity. Mabel's eyes softened, genuinely touched by his kindness, and she gently took his hand. For the first time in his life, Thor was treated like a person worth welcoming. Not by the Empire, but by the very monsters he was supposed to fear. The trembling Imperial captain practically begged Thor to hurry up and sign the transfer document, so they could leave. His face was pale as paper, watching Thor casually chat with an elf as if she were an old friend. He couldn't understand it. How could anyone stand that close to a demon without shaking? Thor made his position clear without raising his voice. He trusted these so-called monsters more than a father who would throw away his own son. After Mabel happily signed the papers, the delivery was officially complete. More Minotaurs appeared from the tree line, and that was all it took. The Imperial soldiers shouted a quick blessing for the treaty and sprinted away so fast they nearly tripped over each other. Thor watched them disappear into the dust without a single glance back. Mabel offered to have the Minotaurs carry him through the dense forest, but Thor declined. He wanted to walk, to feel this new world with his own feet. And as he did, something extraordinary happened. The air in the demon territory was thick with a mysterious energy he had never felt in the Empire. Every breath seemed to push warmth into his chest, into his bones, into parts of himself he didn't even know were empty. Then a voice echoed inside his head. It announced that he had absorbed enough dark magic power to complete a set of 6 basic attributes. His basic alchemy skill didn't just improve, it evolved into something called creation alchemy. Suddenly, new abilities flooded his mind. Material refining, the power to create and reshape substances from pure magic. Attribute addition, the ability to imbue items with specific elemental powers. And appraisal, a skill that let him see the true nature and hidden stats of any object he looked at. Thor stood still in the middle of the forest path, his fingers tingling with power he had never imagined. He realized something that changed everything. His body hadn't been weak all those years, it had been waiting, starving for the dark magic that the Empire simply didn't have. The very land that was supposed to be his prison had just set his true potential free. As they walked deeper into the forest, Mabel stumbled on a branch. A delicate golden chain around her neck snapped, and a small blue stone pendant tumbled into the dirt. She knelt down, picking it up with trembling fingers, her expression crumbling. It was a keepsake from her mother, and the chain was broken beyond what any normal craftsman could fix. Thor knelt beside her and held out his hand. He activated his new appraisal skill, and immediately the pendant revealed itself. A water spirit stone, fragile and ancient. Using material refining, he manifested fresh metal from his own magic, weaving it seamlessly into the broken links. Then he added a water attribute to strengthen the bond, making the chain stronger than it had ever been. The metal grew and repaired itself right there in his palms, as if it were alive. Mabel and the Minotaurs stared in complete silence. One of the Minotaurs whispered that even master dwarf craftsmen couldn't work that fast, or that cleanly. For the first time, someone called Thor a master alchemist, and they actually meant it. The group eventually reached a black carriage decorated with the Demon Lord's silver crest. As they drove toward the capital, Thor pressed his face against the window, and what he saw shattered every lie the Empire had ever told him. There was no chaotic wasteland of rampaging monsters. Instead, he saw fishermen managing ships along a calm river, mermaids swimming alongside the boats, and beastmen tending to sheep on green hillsides. It looked more peaceful than any village Thor had ever seen in the Empire. Mabel explained that the Demon Lords simply put everyone where their talents were most useful, no matter what species they were. Thor asked about previous messengers the Empire had sent. Mabel admitted that most of them either vanished or went home in secret. And in that moment, Thor understood the ugly truth. The Empire sent people here as sacrifices, expecting them to die. And when those people tried to flee instead, the Empire used their disappearance as proof that demons were killers. It was a lie built on cowardice, and Thor was done believing any of it. Mabel turned to him with sincere eyes and asked him to stay. She said the demon territory desperately needed someone with his rare skill. Thor looked out the window one more time at the peaceful world rolling past and made his choice. He would stay, and he would do everything he could to help. But he decided to keep his status as a discarded hostage a secret, at least for now. The carriage rolled through iron gates and stopped inside a courtyard of dark stone and silver banners. Thor was led through a grand hallway into the Demon Lord's throne room. There, sitting on an elevated seat draped in shadow, was Rookie Evergard, the Demon Lord herself. She wore a golden threaded robe and a mask that hid her entire face, with 2 large horns rising from her head that radiated raw magical pressure. Standing beside her was Chancellor Kell, a sharp-eyed man with blue hair who studied Thor like he was reading the fine print of a contract. When Rookie asked what Thor could contribute to her territory, he answered simply. He was an alchemist. Kell's eyebrows shot up, and he murmured that the Empire must be incredibly powerful if they could afford to send away someone with such a rare profession. He was wrong about the reason, of course, but right about the value. Rookie made a decision on the spot. She gave Thor his own workshop and a guest room inside the castle. Then she did something that made his heart stop. She granted him full access to a massive warehouse filled with junk, broken weapons, cracked tools, strange books, all collected by the previous Demon Lord from the era of the hero summoning. Items from another world entirely. She told him he could use any of it as material for his work, and if he created something useful, the demon territory would buy it and look into producing more. Thor stared at the mountain of forgotten relics and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. He had finally found a place where his so-called worthless skill was not just accepted, but actually wanted. After Thor left the throne room, Rookie and Kell had a private conversation. Mabel showed them her repaired pendant, and Kell used his own appraisal magic to confirm it was perfectly restored. A feat their best craftsmen would have called impossible. Kel suspected Thor might be a plant, a show-off sent by the Empire to flaunt their superiority. Rookie wasn't so sure, but she wasn't careless either. She ordered Mabel to serve as Thor's personal caretaker and watchman, keeping a close eye on everything he did. Mabel accepted the job immediately, but she admitted she already trusted him. Her elven intuition told her he was genuine. Left alone in the warehouse, Thor made a discovery that changed everything. He could read the strange languages written in the hero's old books, likely a side effect of his evolved alchemy skill. Among the dusty pages, he found a mail-order catalog filled with realistic pictures of items from the hero's world. Health goods, tools, devices, things designed to boost recovery and improve daily life. Thor's eyes lit up as he flipped through the pages. He decided his first project would be to recreate one of these tools to help the people of the demon territory live better. Mabel arrived with tea and noticed his excitement immediately. As they talked, she mentioned something that caught Thor's attention. She suffered from a magical circulation problem that made her body feel constantly cold. Because of it, she couldn't use magic properly and had to wear thick fur socks just to keep her feet from going numb. Thor flipped back through the catalog and found exactly what he needed: a foot bath, a device from the hero's world designed to warm the feet and improve blood flow. He got to work immediately. He asked Mabel to clean a large metal bucket while he scavenged for parts in the warehouse. He found 2 broken shields, one enchanted with fire and one with wind. Using creation alchemy, he softened the metal like clay and carefully pulled out the magic stones embedded inside. When Mabel returned and saw Thor casually reshaping solid metal with his bare hands as if it were warm dough, she froze in the doorway, completely stunned. Thor layered the bucket and the softened shield metal together, projecting the image of the foot bath from the catalog onto the raw materials. The metal obeyed his vision and reshaped itself into a square tub. He inserted the fire stone at the base to heat the water and the wind stone to create gentle vibrations. He couldn't perfectly replicate the hero's technology, but he could use magic to create something that did the same job just as well. When the process finished, a brand new item sat on the workshop floor. The foot bath was incredibly durable, powered by magic stones that would last a full year, and built to survive for decades. Mabel couldn't believe he had finished such a complex device in under 10 minutes. Thor brushed it off like it was nothing, quietly noting to himself that his father's insults about his worthless alchemy were looking more wrong by the second. They carried the foot bath down to the castle basement to test it with water. Chancellor Kel tagged along, his curiosity outweighing his suspicion. Mabel sat on the stone stairs, peeled off her thick fur socks, and placed her feet into the warm bubbling water. The effect was instant. The fire stone heated the water to the perfect temperature, while the wind stone sent gentle, massaging bubbles across her skin. Mabel felt warmth spreading through her body for the first time in her life, not just in her feet, but deep into her core. Kel watched with wide eyes and then explained what was actually happening. Mabel's grandmother had been human, which caused a permanent imbalance in her magical circulation that no healer in the demon territory could fix. By dissolving fire and wind attributes into the water, Thor had created a way for her body to absorb the missing elemental energy it had been starving for. Then something happened that nobody expected. Mabel stood up from the foot bath, raised her hand and cast a wind magic spell. A real spell, clean and clear. Something she had never been able to do in her entire life. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she threw her arms around Thor, sobbing that she would do anything to repay him for what he had just given her. Kel interrupted the moment with a serious face. He explained that an item this powerful couldn't be kept privately because if the wrong person got their hands on it, it could shift the balance of power across the entire territory. He offered to buy the invention using gold coins, but Thor surprised him. He didn't want gold. Instead, he asked for a steady supply of various magic stones and raw materials from the warehouse. He told Kel he didn't care about politics or money, he just wanted to create things, see people use them, and one day surpass the technology of the ancient heroes themselves. Kel stared at him for a long moment, then agreed to discuss an unlimited material plan with the Demon Lord. Later that evening, in the throne room, Rookie was stunned to hear that Mabel had been cured. She and Kel realized that their understanding of magic and alchemy was on a level neither of them had ever encountered. He had used a simple health good to solve a crisis that their best healers couldn't touch. Meanwhile, far away in the Empire, a very different kind of realization was unfolding. A butler from the Duke's estate was sent to a government office to check on a magic sword belonging to the princess that had been sent for repairs. The director of the office revealed something that made the butler's blood run cold. The sword was almost finished, and the reason was Thor. Before being shipped off as a hostage, Thor had been secretly repairing the blade all along. The director said it plainly. Thor was a genius who had fixed everything in the inventory during his time there. But the Duke's family had given strict orders that Thor's name and achievements be erased from every official record. The butler's hands were trembling. The useless son they had just thrown away as a sacrifice was the only person in the entire capital capable of repairing a high-level imperial artifact. The best alchemist in the city had already refused to touch the sword, calling it impossible. Panicking, the butler threatened the director to never mention Thor's name again and rushed the sword to the capital's top workshop. But even there, the master alchemist could only bow in respect to the craftsmanship already present on the blade. The head of the workshop refused to finish the repair, explaining that matching the elemental attributes of the original metal required a skill that had been lost since the era of the heroes. The old man was practically begging to meet whoever had done the previous work, calling it breathtaking. The butler was sweating through his clothes. The genius they needed was the same son the Duke had just sent away to die. With no other choice, the butler forced the workshop to do a cheap surface-level fix to the sword, would at least look presentable for the princess's ceremony. The alchemist agreed, but only after making the butler sign a contract taking full responsibility if the blade shattered. Back in the demon castle, Thor's morning started with a breakfast that shocked him. It was the same meal the demon lord ate, rich, warm, and carefully prepared. Compared to the 3-day-old bread he used to survive on in the Empire, it felt like a dream. Mabel was so grateful for her healed magic and her restored pendant that she tried to feed him herself, which made things wonderfully awkward. Thor told her he wanted to explore the territory and eventually set up a separate workshop for his alchemy. Mabel promised to get permission and mentioned that the demon lord was actually quite easygoing. Behind the mask? Once alone, Thor returned to the hero's catalog and found something that made his pulse quicken. A simple warehouse, a storage device that looked small on the outside but contained a massive space in another dimension inside. To build it, he needed earth, wind, and dark magic. He had enough earth and wind, but his dark magic was dangerously low because he had spent his whole life in the Empire where the energy barely existed. Just as he was wondering where to find more power, a massive wave of dark magic suddenly flooded into his room from the hallway. His system drank it up instantly, completing every requirement. Thor opened the door and found the demon lord standing right there. Rookie had come by secretly to thank him for helping Mabel, and her natural dark aura had solved his problem without either of them realizing it. Unlike every other messenger the Empire had sent, Thor wasn't trembling or begging. He was calm and respectful, which made Rookie curious. When she asked what he was working on, Thor showed her the catalog and told her his goal. He wanted to create items that surpassed even the ancient heroes' technology and make the demon territory a better place to live than the Empire. Rookie stared at him for a long beat, then gave him the green light to start building immediately. Thor didn't waste a single second. He pulled out the metal lumps he had already prepared from old shields and armor, arranged them on the floor, and began the most ambitious project of his life. The key wasn't the metal shell, it was the emptiness inside. A void created by dark magic that would open a doorway into a separate dimension. He mapped every detail of the simple warehouse from the catalog in his mind, then used creation alchemy to project a translucent magical blueprint onto the raw scraps. By weaving dark magic for space and earth magic for structural stability into every layer, he manifested the warehouse into existence. The finished product was a metal box barely over a meter tall, but its stats were staggering. Inside was a separate dimension with breathable air and a preservation effect that prevented food and water from spoiling. It could even absorb dark magic from the surrounding environment on its own, making it completely self-sustaining for 100 years. Thor invited Mabel to step inside and check the interior. When she crossed the threshold, both of them gasped. Despite the tiny exterior, the inside was a massive hall the size of a duke's mansion. Mabel was so thrilled she started running laps around the enormous empty space, laughing like a child. Thor watched her and felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with magic. He admitted that his real goal was to eventually surpass the technology of the ancient heroes who founded the Empire, to prove that the skill his father called worthless could build a world better than the one that threw him away. Mabel stopped running, turned to face him, and promised to support his alchemy with everything she had. The moment was interrupted by Rookie's voice calling from outside the box. Because the warehouse was a separate dimension, they hadn't heard her knocking. Rookie was curious and a little suspicious about a foreign alchemist creating a pocket dimension inside her castle, so she demanded to see the interior for herself. Thor agreed, but the instant the demon lord stepped through the entrance, something unexpected happened. The warehouse had an automatic organization function, and it identified Rookie's high-level magic mask and enchanted robe as rare items that needed to be stored properly. so it stripped them right off her body. Rookie scrambled to cover her face, but it was too late. Her true form was revealed. Not a terrifying horned monster, but a beautiful petite blonde girl with dark red eyes, looking every bit like a nervous 15-year-old caught without her costume. After the initial panic, Rookie calmed down and explained the truth. Because the Empire only respected raw power, she had been forced to use magical items to appear mysterious and intimidating. Without the mask and the horns, nobody would take a small girl seriously as the ruler of an entire territory. She admitted she felt insecure about her size and her slow physical growth. Thor looked at her without a trace of judgment and told her something she had never heard before. Her natural beauty far surpassed anything he could ever create with alchemy. Then he did something that surprised even Mabel. He shared his own secret. He told Rookie that he wasn't a prestigious guest sent by the Empire. He was a discarded hostage, a sacrifice his own father deemed worthless because he lacked combat power. The room went quiet. Two people who had been judged their entire lives by a world that only valued strength were standing face to face, both finally seen for who they really were. Mabel was shocked that Thor would willingly reveal such a dangerous weakness when he could have used the Empire's name to make demands. Thor explained he didn't want to hide behind a lie, and asked her to keep his status secret so the territory wouldn't treat him differently. In exchange, he promised to guard Rookie's true identity. Rookie burst into laughter, finding it ridiculous that Thor would trade his biggest secret just to protect hers. But under the laughter, she was deeply touched. She declared that since Thor trusted her with the truth, she would trust him completely in return. She ordered Mabel to spread the word that Thor was a prestigious guest and her personal alchemist, ensuring no one would ever suspect he was a discarded hostage. Then Rookie made a decision that changed the dynamic of the entire castle. She declared the magical warehouse their exception zone, a private place where she could remove her mask and they could all speak freely without titles or pretenses. She even held Thor's hand and promised to be his ally. Mabel suggested turning a corner of the warehouse into a cozy tea party spot where the three of them could relax together. Thor agreed, realizing that his inventions meant the most when they made the people around him happy. That night, Chancellor Kell nearly had a heart attack when he learned that Thor had recreated a storage box, a legendary ability once exclusive to the ancient heroes. The power to carry an infinite amount of items in a pocket dimension. Kell paced the room, muttering about how this could disrupt the balance of the entire world. But Rookie calmed him down by telling him Thor had already promised to make storage boxes for her, and Mabel as well. Kell realized that with Thor around, the very concept of rare items was about to become meaningless. Then Kell suggested something that made Rookie's mask almost crack. He proposed a political marriage between Thor and Mabel to permanently tie his talents to the demon territory. Rookie shut that idea down instantly. Knowing Thor's history as a discarded son, she refused to let anyone use him or his future family as political tools. Not now, not ever. But underneath her mask, her cheeks were burning at the thought of Thor marrying someone else, a reaction she desperately tried to hide from Kell. Meanwhile, in the warehouse, Mabel was helping Thor set up the tea party area when she opened up about Rookie's past. Rookie had been raised by a father who valued raw power above everything, and because she looked small and weak, she felt she had no choice but to hide behind a mask. Thor realized they were mirror images of each other, both judged by parents who measured worth in the ability to destroy. Mabel also warned him about a dangerous figure in the territory, General Risinga, a massive flame giant descendant who stood over 2 meters tall and believed that physical power was the only thing that mattered. She advised Thor to avoid anyone who lived by the rule of might makes right, because they would never understand what he did. Before she left for the night, Mabel insisted that Thor stop using formal language with her. As the Demon Lord's personal alchemist, he outranked almost everyone in the castle. After some back and forth, Thor finally agreed to call her simply Mabel. And for the first time in his life, lying in a room that felt like home, Thor felt something he had never known in the power-hungry Empire: belonging. He decided that night that he would use every ounce of his alchemy to make this land better than the Empire ever was. Meanwhile, across the border, the consequences of throwing Thor away were just beginning to hit. A royal party was underway in the imperial capital, and Duke Barga Reguse was the center of attention, basking in praise from other nobles. He bragged openly about sacrificing his son for the nation, calling Thor a disgrace and a good-for-nothing. His butler kept tugging at his sleeve, trying to whisper a warning, but the Duke waved him away. Then Princess Lion arrived, and the party went silent. Instead of greeting the Duke, she ordered her guards to throw him out. She called him a threat to her life. The magic sword the Duke's household had supposedly repaired had shattered during a real monster battle, nearly killing her. Lyanna held up the broken blade and exposed the truth in front of everyone. The Duke's butler had signed a contract admitting they had only done a cheap surface-level fake repair because nobody in the capital could actually fix it. But the princess noticed something strange about the blade. A small section of it had been repaired perfectly, the metalwork flawless, the elemental attributes precisely matched. That section was the only reason she had survived the fight. Lyanna demanded to know the name of the genius who had done the real work so she could bring them into her service. The Duke's face went white. The genius she wanted was the same son he had just shipped off to die. After the public humiliation, the Duke was banned from the palace, and in a blind rage, he threw his own butler into prison to take the blame. But the damage was done, and the name he had tried so hard to erase was now the only name anyone wanted to hear. Back in the demon territory, Thor's peaceful morning started with a tour of the castle guided by Mabel. They stopped in front of a statue of the first demon lord, and Thor's creation alchemy immediately told him something the others had missed. The sword the statue was holding was a fake. Mabel confirmed the original legendary magic sword had been lost ages ago. Thor filed that away in his mind, already imagining a project, a new weapon he could craft for Rookie. Something unique like a whip sword that could channel her dark magic. Their peaceful tour ended when a wall of heat and muscle appeared around the corner. General Risinga, the leader of the military faction Mabel had warned about, stood over 2 meters tall with red hair that flickered like living flames. He looked down at Thor with obvious doubt, having come to judge whether the prestigious guest from the Empire was worth the hybrid just a skinny human. Thor politely introduced himself, but Risinga wasn't impressed. He called Thor a weak boy who looked more like a desk worker than a warrior. Standing beside the general was a figure in full plate armor that covered every inch of skin. His daughter Agnes. When Risinga realized Thor had no combat skills, he scoffed, saying he had hoped for a sparring match between Thor and Agnes. During the conversation, Agnes's helmet began spouting tiny flames as she struggled to contain her emotions. Mabel stepped between them and scolded the general for disrespecting a guest of the Demon Lord. Risinga ignored the lecture and questioned how a weak alchemist could possibly help their ruler. Thor answered calmly, his eyes fixed on Agnes's armor. He had noticed something. The armor used double earth attributes for fire resistance, but it was becoming loose and warped from the heat Agnes generated. He offered to strengthen it. The general took offense at the idea of a weak human touching his daughter's gear and stormed off, dragging Agnes behind him. Later that evening, after a long tour, Thor decided to visit the castle bathhouse to relax. There was no occupied sign, so he entered the resting area and immediately spotted Agnes's armor, lying in a heap on the floor. Through an open door to the boiler room, he saw something he wasn't supposed to see. Agnes, without her armor, dancing with 3 small fire-breathing salamanders. She was using her own flames to help the tiny spirits boil the water for the castle's bath. As a descendant of the flame giant Ifrit, her body naturally generates heat intense enough to incinerate normal clothing, which is why she could only wear fire-resistant armor. The moment Agnes noticed Thor standing in the doorway, she panicked and accidentally fired a blast of flame straight at him. Thor reacted on instinct, pulling out a small simple warehouse item and using it to suck in and trap the fire before it reached him. Agnes hid behind the boiler room door, terrified that she had hurt a guest or that her father would punish the salamanders for her lack of control. Thor spoke to her through the door in a gentle voice, calming her down. He understood now why the general had been so protective. Fixing Agnes's armor literally meant taking away the only thing she could wear. Once she'd put her armor back on, the two sat in the resting area in awkward silence. Agnes took the blame, admitting she had forgotten to put up the occupied sign while she was helping the fire spirits. Thor watched the salamanders nuzzle against her armored legs and realized something. Beneath the scary full-body armor, Agnes was just a kind girl doing her best to manage a power she couldn't fully control, with her only friends being the tiny creatures who couldn't get burned. Thor apologized for seeing her without her armor, then quickly shifted the conversation to her power. His appraisal skill had already told him the real problem. Her armor was failing because it simply couldn't handle the intensity of her heat. Agnes removed her helmet, revealing topaz-colored eyes and hair that flickered like real fire. She explained everything. As a descendant of Ifrit, she generated massive amounts of heat that she couldn't control yet. Whenever she got nervous or excited, flames erupted from her body, burning anything she wore and hurting anyone close to her. That was why she stayed in the boiler room, dancing with salamanders, fire spirits who were the only living things she couldn't accidentally destroy. Thor made her a promise as the territory's alchemist, he would find a solution. But that would take time, so for now, he gave her the ultra-small simple warehouse he had made earlier. He showed her how to use it as a safety valve, storing her flames inside whenever they flared up unexpectedly. Agnes accepted the gift with shaking hands, mentioning quietly that she only needed to manage for 5 more years until her powers naturally stabilized at age 20. 5 more years trapped in heavy armor, unable to hug anyone, unable to wear a simple dress. Thor wasn't going to let that happen. Back in his room, he dove into the mail order catalog looking for a real solution. Mabel arrived and, seeing his determination, shared a secret. She and Agnes had been childhood friends, but years ago, when Agnes's powers first awakened, she had accidentally burned Mabel's arm. The wound healed, but the guilt never did, and Agnes had been hiding behind her armor ever since, keeping her distance from everyone she cared about. Thor found the answer deep in the catalog, a health promotion pendant based on the hero world's concept of 5-element magic. The idea was elegant. If Agnes's fire was too strong, the pendant would automatically convert that excess energy into the other 4 elements: wood, earth, metal, and water, perfectly balancing her power. Using creation alchemy, Thor began the most complex build of his career. The pendant's design featured 5 divine beasts: the azure dragon, the white tiger, the vermilion bird, the black tortoise, and the Kirin. As he shaped the intricate silver framework, his system rewarded him with a brand new skill: 5-attribute manipulation, unlocking the hero world's unique wood and metal elements. When the final piece clicked into place, Thor held up a masterpiece, a high-rarity pendant housing a magic conversion mechanism that would divide the wearer's power into 5 equal parts. If this worked, Agnes would finally be able to live a normal life without her flames destroying everything she touched. And it worked exactly as planned. Instead of letting Agnes's fire magic explode outward, the pendant recycled the energy, converting it into the other 4 elements. The excess power didn't just disappear, it boosted her health, her vitality, and her physical strength. While Thor continued refining the pendant, General Risinga was preparing to leave the castle for a mission in the south. He apologized to Agnes for her uncontrollable flames, blaming the strong blood of Ifrit running through her veins. He wanted Agnes to use her destructive fire on the battlefield, believing that hurting things was the only way her power could ever be useful. Agnes nodded obediently, but inside, she was thinking about the boy who wasn't afraid of her flames, the boy who called them beautiful. The next evening, Thor met Agnes in the bathhouse resting area for their final meeting before the general departed. Mabel was there too, carrying a spare maid outfit. When Thor presented the finished pendant, Agnes's face went pale. She was terrified of trying on normal clothes, convinced she would just burn them and disappoint the one person who believed she could change. Thor looked her in the eye and told her that as the territory's alchemist, he would stay by her side and fix the item as many times as it took until it worked perfectly. Agnes went into the boiler room with Mabel to change. She placed the pendant around her neck, slipped into the white maid outfit, and held her breath. The magic kicked in instantly. The system confirmed that her overflowing fire was being perfectly balanced across all 5 elements. When she stepped out, the room went silent. Agnes looked like a completely different person. In the white apron and headdress, with her flickering red hair falling softly around her shoulders instead of radiating dangerous heat, she looked stunning. When the embarrassment hit and her magic surged, the pendant simply converted the excess energy into physical strength. She accidentally jumped so high she nearly hit the ceiling, floating for a moment before landing gracefully, her body lighter and healthier than it had ever been. The years of guilt for burning Mabel finally began to melt away. Mabel closed the distance and hugged her tightly, proving once and for all that Agnes was no longer a danger to the people she loved. Agnes wept, free at last from the heavy prison of her own armor. Through her tears, she thanked Thor for giving her a chance at a normal life. The emotional moment was interrupted by General Risinga's booming voice echoing down the hallway. Agnes quickly explained everything: how Thor's alchemy had suppressed her flames and allowed her to finally wear normal clothes. The general, who had doubted Thor, mocked him, and nearly driven him away, dropped to his knees. He slammed his forehead against the stone floor again and again, overwhelmed with guilt for his earlier cruelty. He even reached for his own eyes as punishment. But Agnes and Thor managed to stop him before he went that far. Risinga admitted the truth. He had only pushed Agnes toward violence because he thought proving her strength was the only way she could gain confidence. Now, seeing his daughter smiling and safe in a simple dress, he pledged his absolute loyalty to Thor. As a reward, the general granted Thor full access to his territory's mines to search for rare alchemy materials like meteoric iron. Agnes promised to dedicate herself to supporting Thor's dreams in return for what he had given her. That night, in the Demon Lord's throne room, General Risinga dropped to one knee before Rookie and Chancellor Kell. In a move that shocked everyone, he swore an absolute oath of allegiance in the name of the primordial flame. It was a sacred vow of the Ifrit bloodline that hadn't been spoken since the time of the first Demon Lord. He called Thor his benefactor and confessed that he had initially tried to kidnap Thor out of a misunderstanding, but Agnes had stopped him. He described how Agnes, empowered by the pendant, had easily restrained him and lifted him over her head with one arm. Rookie's eyes went wide behind her mask. Thor hadn't just suppressed Agnes's flames. He had converted that trapped energy into raw physical power that rivaled the legendary hero's magic. Instead of punishing the general, Rookie had a better plan. She confiscated a piece of Risinga's land near the southern mines to build Thor a private mansion and a world-class alchemy workshop. Risinga was overjoyed to pay for the construction, seeing it as his chance to repay the debt. Before leaving, the general hinted that Agnes's vow to Thor might carry a deeper romantic meaning. In their culture, leaving Rookie curious and Kel slightly panicked about the political implications. The next morning, Agnes departed with her father, wearing a normal dress lent by Mabel. Looking forward to the day Thor would visit her new home. In his workshop, Thor examined the mysterious black stone Agnes had given him as a gift. His alchemy skills identified it as an iron meteorite from outer space. The discovery unlocked a brand new attribute, space magic, an element completely unknown in the Empire. As Thor explored the messy warehouse next to his room, he found ancient text written by the first Demon Lord, detailed records of the territory's history and its people. He got so absorbed in reading that he nearly forgot about his afternoon tea party with Rookie and Mabel. When Rookie arrived, she had ditched her mask and heavy robes for a stylish black outfit with ribbons. She looked like a normal 15-year-old girl, and when Thor complimented her, she turned red and demanded he stop calling her Your Majesty and just use her name. During the cleanup, Thor found a short black magic sword in a wooden box. His appraisal revealed it was a discarded prototype, a failed attempt to recreate the legendary magic sword, with only a basic strength boost and a dull blade. Rookie gave it to him as a gift, and Thor immediately pitched a new project. He wanted to use his alchemy to transform this rejected replica into a masterpiece that Rookie could wield in battle, something worthy of her true face. Rookie was touched but told him not to rush. For her upcoming monster mission, she didn't need a frontline weapon. She needed something that could let her soldiers attack safely from long range. Thor took the challenge to heart and started searching his catalog for a solution. The next day, he found the perfect item, a laser pointer. In the hero's world, it was used to mark targets and increase the accuracy and range of weapons, like crossbows by 5 times. Thor realized this was exactly what the demon territory needed to eliminate monsters before they could get close. Using creation alchemy, he combined light and dark magic stones, compressing the light into a straight beam and adding wind attributes to extend its reach. The result was a 6-centimeter metal cylinder, a high-rarity laser pointer with a built-in safety feature that prevented it from being aimed at humans or demons. He and Mabel went to the castle's training ground to test it, where they found soldiers arguing about the best strategy for the upcoming monster hunt. Thor shouldered the device, and a bright red dot appeared on a distant stone target. He asked Mabel to fire an ice spell at the mark. Every icicle arrow hit dead center, even from 3.5 times the normal magic range. The beam wasn't just a visual guide. The flow of light and dark magic actually pulled spells toward the target. The arguing soldiers fell completely silent, staring as a maid who used to struggle with basic magic hit targets at impossible distances with perfect accuracy. Within the hour, the commanders were rushing to the Chancellor's office, demanding Thor's invention be approved for the mission. While Thor's reputation grew in the demon territory, trouble was brewing at the southern border. A corrupt imperial messenger named Margrave Go arrived at General Risinga's territory to finalize a mining treaty. Instead of following the agreement, Go had tried to bribe Risinga, proposing they extend the contract by years and pocket the extra silver for themselves. His plan was to frame Thor for the crime, assuming the demons still considered him a worthless hostage. He had no idea that Risinga now considered Thor a hero and a close friend who had transformed his daughter's life. The general's body erupted in flames so intense they turned the meeting table to ash. He screamed at the terrified Margrave, declaring Thor his benefactor and a potential husband for Agnes. Risinga canceled the negotiations on the spot and promised to report the Empire's corruption directly to the Emperor. The Margrave and his men fled in terror as the general shattered the reinforced windows behind them. When Agnes heard that the Empire's messenger had insulted Thor, her pendant glowed as she prepared to chase them down and burn them to cinders. But Risinga stopped her, explaining that if Thor discovered the Empire truly viewed him as disposable, it would break his heart. They agreed to keep the insult secret to protect Thor's feelings. The fallout hit the Empire like a hammer. The Duke, who had bragged to the Emperor that the mining deal was guaranteed, was stunned to learn it had collapsed specifically because someone had insulted his discarded son. The Minister of Military Affairs, Zagran, arrived at the Duke's office with soldiers and laid out the consequences. Thor was now a taboo subject in the Empire. The boy they called useless had won the favor of the demon territory's most powerful leaders in just a few days. The Duke was stripped of his title, demoted to a mere count, and forced to fund the entire monster expedition out of his own pocket. To save his life, the former Duke was sent to the front lines as a captain of 10 men in a dangerous southern conflict. The once mighty Reguse family was effectively ruined, all because they threw away the one person who could have saved them. At the demon castle, Rookie's hands trembled as she read Risinga's full report. Learning that Thor's own father had planned to use him as a disposable scapegoat made her blood boil. She decided she would be the one to tell Thor the truth personally. During their next tea party, Rookie tried to act normal, but as she looked at Thor's smiling face, she couldn't hold it in. Her voice cracked, and she began to cry as she told him everything. That his father had tried to frame him for a crime that could have cost him his life. Thor was surprised to see the demon lord crying for him, but he took the news calmly. He comforted Rookie and told her it sounded exactly like something his father would do. He explained that his grandfather, a legendary swordmaster, had been killed by a common thief while drunk, which taught Thor early on that raw strength was unreliable. Rookie wouldn't let go of his hand, confessing that she didn't want him to feel lonely after learning how completely his family had discarded him. To help her feel connected even while they slept in separate rooms, Thor found the perfect item in his catalog, a body pillow. Not a normal pillow, but one made of a magical material that could change shape based on the owner's magic and thoughts. He crafted it using bean shells and magic stones, adding water and wind elements so it would stay soft, cool, and breathable. When Mabel held the pillow cover and filled it with her magic, it transformed into a perfect copy of her. Thor called the creation a failure because it couldn't capture Mabel's real beauty or the kindness she showed him every day. He went on such a long, heartfelt rant praising her that Mabel couldn't even look up from embarrassment. He made a version that looked like himself for Rookie, explaining that because the pillow shared his senses, she could hold its hand and he would feel it in his own room. That night, Mabel sneaked the pillow into Rookie's quarters, and the two girls fell asleep holding the pillow's hand, feeling Thor's warmth from across the castle. The next morning, Thor mentioned he'd had a strange dream about someone writing a name on his palms. All night, Rookie turned bright red and shouted that what girls do in bed is a maiden secret and he should never ask again. In his next formal presentation to the court, Thor introduced a breakthrough material, magic cloth. By melting magic stones into fabric, he created 4 types of elemental cloth, each with unique properties. Earth brown for extreme durability and fire resistance, water blue for flexibility and active wear, fire red for heat insulation in freezing conditions, and wind green for breathability in scorching heat. The military officers were thrilled, but Thor also showed his experimental failures. A dark cloth that absorbed all light, turning pitch black, and a light cloth that became 80% transparent when magic flowed through it. Thor considered them useless, but the room stared at the semi-transparent cloak in stunned silence, recognizing its terrifying potential. Rookie ordered the wind cloth to be used for the upcoming volcano mission and told Thor to take a break at General Risinga's territory. Before leaving, Mabel briefed Thor on their target, Gargarasa, a massive armored spider whose sticky threads could trap anyone and silence mages. And the mission was a joint operation with the Empire, meaning Princess Lyanna would be there with her legendary holy sword. Thor had no interest in the Empire, but his curiosity as an alchemist burned. He wanted to study a real holy sword so he could eventually craft something better for Rookie. As the army marched south, Thor's inventions transformed the march itself. In the scorching volcanic region, the wind cloth tents and uniforms kept every soldier cool and dry. The failed transparent light cloth found a clever use as storage bags. Soldiers could check their inventory without opening anything. At the base of the mountain, Rookie held the final strategy meeting. Risinga's fire units would burn the spider's webs. The Minotaurs powered by Thor's health pendants would handle close combat, and the mages would use laser pointers for long-range precision strikes. But across the valley, the Empire had already started the fight on their own. Minister Zagran had brought Princess Lyanna to make a show of imperial power. The plan was to use disgraced nobles as bait to lure the monster into the open, then have Lyanna deliver a flashy killing blow in front of the watching demon army. Lyanna charged at the giant spider with her glowing holy sword, looking every bit the hero. But she walked straight into a trap. A swarm of smaller spiders hidden beneath the boss monster attacked her at once. She burned through all her magic, just clearing the small ones, and collapsed, exhausted and unable to move, as the massive Gargarasa turned its jaws toward her. Then a small red dot appeared on the monster's head. A beam of light stretched all the way back to the hills where the demon army was stationed, impossibly far away. A concentrated blast of magic struck the red dot, and part of the monster's head was blown off in an instant. Lioness stood there in complete shock, unable to understand how the demons had landed a perfect hit from a distance no one should have been able to reach. The demon army unleashed wave after wave of precision strikes, every spell following the laser pointer's beam to the exact same point. Rookie watched from the hills and realized something that made her breath catch. The laser pointer wasn't just extending range, it was acting as an attack amplifier, pulling every soldier's spell into a single devastating point of impact. Thor had accidentally created a weapon of mass destruction. Refusing to let the Imperial soldiers die, Rookie ordered her army to assist the retreat. Then she decided to show her own strength. She unleashed her void magic flame, a dark power that erases existence itself. Because the laser pointer was powered by dark magic, it created a constant link between Rookie and her spell, letting her move the black flames freely just by shifting the red dot. She wiped out the swarm effortlessly, steering the fire from target to target like a remote-controlled disaster. The Gargarasa tried to flee, but Rookie pinned it against a rock wall and crushed it under relentless black flames until it stopped moving. The demon territory's soldiers erupted in cheers, hailing Rookie as a ruler more powerful than the first demon lord. General Risinga and his warriors were left standing awkwardly, disappointed that Thor's inventions had made the battle so easy. They never even got to swing their weapons. An hour later, the two armies set up camps, the demons celebrating a flawless victory with 0 injuries, the Empire nursing wounded soldiers and bruised pride. At the meeting between the leaders, Princess Lyanna, still covered in monster blood and visibly shaking, thanked Rookie for saving them. Zagran tried to spin the disaster as a joint victory, but Kel and Risinga shut that down by pointing out the Empire had attacked early and nearly caused a catastrophe. To end the argument, Zagran offered a bribe, a formal letter of appreciation and a chest of treasure. Rookie accepted it strategically, knowing the letter was official proof that the Empire owed them. Then Lyanna asked one last question that changed everything. She mentioned that someone had recently repaired her magic sword and she wanted to find him, calling the alchemist a low-ranked tool who should devote his entire life and body to serving the royal family. Rookie's blood boiled. The Empire had thrown away a genius and now wanted him back, not as a person, but as a possession. Rookie tore off her mask, her red eyes blazing, and told Lyanna that the Empire had made its choice to discard him. She shouted that Thor was happy in the demon territory, that he was her dear friend, and that she would never hand him over to people who only wanted to exploit him. Realizing she had just screamed about how much she loved living with Thor in front of both armies, Rookie turned crimson and jammed her mask back on. After the meeting, Thor, Mabel, and Agnes headed to the monster's nest to search for survivors and spider remains. Hidden in the shadows by his new dark magic robe, Thor suddenly recognized a figure approaching through the trees. It was the guard captain of his father, the same man who had helped frame him during his exile. The captain handed over a letter claiming the Duke wanted to apologize and bring Thor home. Thor had the letter read aloud for everyone to hear. It was a blatant trap, instructions to spy on the demon territory, report on Risinga's military strength, and bring Agnes back to the Empire as a hostage. Thor was done. Standing before his friends and the demon soldiers, he announced that he was throwing away the name Reguse forever. From that day forward, he would be known only as Thor, using his late mother's surname, an alchemist of the demon territory. Mabel and Agnes wept at his resolve, and the demon soldiers cheered, swearing loyalty regardless of his past. When the captain tried to draw his sword and flee, he found he couldn't move. The cushion Thor had given him to sit on was actually a trap device designed for capturing monsters, and it worked perfectly on humans too. The captain was taken into custody, and the demon army celebrated their victory. Later, in her private tent, Rookie told Thor that Princess Lyanna was searching for the alchemist, who fixed her sword, wanting to force him into eternal service. She admitted she had already refused the offer on the spot, because she didn't want to lose her friend. Thor reassured her immediately. He had no intention of going back to a place where he was just a tool. He was happy here because Rookie gave him freedom and appreciated his work. Rookie removed her mask, her eyes soft with relief, and thanked him quietly. Thor then apologized, admitting that after seeing Lyanna's holy sword, he wasn't yet skilled enough to make one that surpassed it. He asked for more time to study and improve. Rookie gave him a special alchemy permit that allowed him to practice anywhere in her territory, and sent him off with Mabel and Agnes to General Risinga's land to finally build his own mansion and workshop. Back in the Empire, the consequences continued to cascade. The Duke was stripped of all influence and sent to the dangerous southern front. As a captain of 10 men, Zagran framed the failed mission as a joint victory to save his own reputation. But privately, he was terrified of the demon territory's long-range capabilities. Princess Lyanna, haunted by Rookie's passionate defense of Thor, felt a strange obsession growing with the mysterious alchemist she couldn't find. She visited her twin sister Sophia, a powerful light magic user confined to a secluded palace due to her frail health. Sophia warned Lyanna not to become a cold tool of the Empire, but Lyanna was to deepen Zagran's influence to listen. Days later, at General Risinga's mansion, Thor examined the meteorite stone Agnes had given him and unlocked a new space attribute for his crafting. He found the perfect location for his workshop, a large 2-story mansion with balanced elemental energy, confirmed by a group of pixies who appeared on the rooftops. These tiny winged creatures, each with different elemental hair colors, communicated by tapping on trees and waving in patterns to tell Thor which locations had the right magic balance. Thor was so kind and respectful that the pixies, the sheest race in the world, pledged their loyalty to him after he promised to make them magic clothes so they wouldn't have to wear leaves that constantly fell apart. In the pixie forest, Thor met Renee, a tiny black-haired pixie who led him to their greatest problem. A pixie named Solo was dangerously ill because her light magic was too powerful for her fragile body to handle. Thor recognized the condition immediately. It was the same magical circulation problem he had already solved for Mabel. He gave Solo a foot bath to fix her stagnant magic flow and a dress made of light attribute cloth that let her fly for the first time. The pixies were so grateful they kissed his forehead and volunteered to be his personal messengers, delivering letters to the Demon Lord's castle at supersonic speed. When the pixies arrived at the castle gate, Rookie and Kel couldn't believe it. Thor hadn't just befriended the most elusive race in the world. He was already using them as his personal courier service to submit invention requests. Rookie approved everything and realized that the magic cloth wasn't just clothing. It was a sensory tool that gave the pixies reflexes comparable to legendary heroes. Thor's next invention was the UV-cut parasol, designed to neutralize the Empire's most terrifying weapon, ultimate vivid light magic. He built it with 3 complex layers: water to slow incoming light, silver grains to scatter and dismantle the magic, and dark fabric to absorb any leftover energy. In the official test, Solo fired her strongest light attack at the parasol. Thor layered 3 parasols together for safety, and the massive sphere of light, the size of a human head, was reduced to a grain of sand by the time it passed through, then vanished entirely. Chancellor Kel's reflexive magic barrier had nothing left to block. The weapon that had once shattered the defenses of the first Demon Lord had just been completely neutralized by a boy the Empire threw away. But Thor wasn't done. He revealed one more invention, the chain lock. When activated, the black chain burrowed into the bedrock and fused with the earth itself, making whatever it protected completely immovable unless someone could lift the ground. If anyone tried to force it open, the chain would crush and destroy the item inside before self-destructing, ensuring no technology could ever fall into the wrong hands. Thor explained his philosophy: his items could be remade, but lives could not. Rookie whispered a personal promise to reward him not as a ruler, but as a friend. As the political tension with the Empire escalated, the Minister of War sent Princess Sophia to the northern border town of Nosa for a 3-year military exercise. Sophia was being used as a weapon, ordered to showcase her light magic to intimidate the demons. But alone in her room, exhausted and watched by spies, Sophia whispered a wish to the open window, hoping for a way to tell the demon territory she didn't want to fight. A faint voice answered her, and when she turned around, a white owl was sitting on her windowsill. It was one of Thor's pixies in disguise, wearing his 1C invention that allowed them to transform into perfect animal forms. The owl explained that its master desired peace and offered Sophia a deal. If she worked toward ending the military harassment, Thor would provide the same healing alchemy that had saved the pixies. Sophia accepted without hesitation. That midnight, the owls delivered a foot bath to her room, and as the warm vibrating water flowed across her feet, years of stagnant light magic finally began to circulate. By morning, Sophia woke up feeling stronger than she ever had in her life. The sluggishness was gone, her skin was glowing, and she could cast magic without pain. She didn't wait for her handlers. She dressed herself, walked through the mansion with energy that stunned every soldier who saw her, and took command of the garrison while Isaac and Mariella were away chasing Thor's decoy, a fake legendary sword designed to waste their time. Sophia agreed to meet Demon Lord Rookie at the border. When Isaac returned and tried to regain control, it was too late. The once frail princess had already outmaneuvered him. At the border meeting, Thor knelt before Sophia and made a vow. If he spoke any lies about the demon territory's peaceful intentions, she should strike him down with her strongest light magic. Sophia was so moved by his sincerity that she took his hand and let him lead her to meet Rookie. The two leaders spoke as equals, apologizing, planning trade routes, and recognizing each other's wisdom. Then Sophia made a stunning announcement. She wanted to become engaged to Thor, not for love, but as a calculated political shield. If she was tied to the demon territory, the Empire's corrupt officials couldn't recall her or force her into another arrangement. Before the details could be settled, a monster emergency erupted. Imperial soldiers had accidentally woken a nest of giant centipedes, including a leader twice the size of the others. Thor's inventions turned the tide again. The pixies dropped chain locks from the sky to pin the monsters down. Rookie's laser-guided black flames carved through the swarm, and the combined forces fought side by side for the first time. When the massive leader centipede burst from the ground behind Princess Sophia, Isaac screamed for the demon territory to save her, and they did, without hesitation. The monsters were defeated, and for the first time, Imperial and demon soldiers stood on the same battlefield with something that almost looked like mutual respect. As the dust settled and the joint forces moved to clear the monster den, Thor walked into the dark cave with Mabel and Risinga, the pixies disguised as cats sitting on their shoulders. Behind him, nations that had hated each other for generations were sharing water and bandaging each other's wounds. Thor didn't carry a sword, he never had. He carried a catalog of forgotten inventions, a head full of impossible ideas, and the stubborn belief that making people's lives better was worth more than any blade. The Duke who threw him away was now a disgraced captain of 10 men on a forgotten battlefield. The princess who called him a tool was haunted by the memory of the demon lord screaming his name, with more passion than anyone in the Empire had ever shown for anything. And the Empire that measured everything in combat power was slowly realizing that the boy they deemed worthless had changed the balance of the entire world without ever throwing a single punch. Thor Canaan, once the discarded eldest son of a duke who couldn't swing a sword, now stood at the center of a web that connected the demon lord, a flame general, a princess, a race of legendary pixies, and an elven maid who would follow him anywhere. His alchemy had cured Mabel's lifelong magical imbalance and given her the power to cast spells she had only dreamed about. It had freed Agnes from the armored prison of her own flames and turned her uncontrollable fire into the raw strength of a hero. It had given the pixies clothes, wings, and a voice in a world that had forgotten they existed. It had neutralized the Empire's most terrifying weapon with nothing more than silver grains and layered fabric. It had turned a frail, bedridden princess into a leader who outmaneuvered her own handlers in a single morning. And it had given a young demon lord the courage to take off her mask and show the world who she really was. None of these were acts of destruction. Every single one was an act of creation. Thor never asked for glory, he asked for magic stones and old junk. He never demanded loyalty, he earned it by fixing a broken pendant, building a warm foot bath, and staying up all night to solve problems no one else could. When the Empire called him weak, he didn't argue. He just left and built a better life somewhere else. When his father tried to use him as a spy, he didn't rage. He simply dropped the name Reguse and chose the one his mother had given him. When the princess called him a tool, Rookie screamed louder than she ever had in her life to protect him. And when Sophia whispered into the dark, hoping someone would hear her, Thor sent an owl. The Empire believed that power meant the ability to destroy. Thor proved that real power was the ability to create something so valuable that even your enemies would rather talk than fight. His laser pointer ended a monster hunt in minutes. His parasol neutralized the magic that had terrified demon lords for generations. His chain locks made the demon territory's secrets untouchable. His magic cloth turned the shyest creatures in the world into the fastest scouts alive. And his body pillow let a lonely girl fall asleep holding the hand of someone who actually cared about her. That last one might have been the most powerful invention of all. In the demon territory, Thor found what the Empire never gave him. A purpose that matched his talent and people who valued what he could do instead of punishing him for what he couldn't. Rookie gave him a warehouse of junk and told him to make something useful. He gave her back a pocket dimension, a light-canceling parasol, a revolution in military strategy, and a friend who would never lie to her. Mabel gave him tea and kindness on his first night in a strange land. He gave her back the ability to use magic for the first time in her life. Agnes gave him a meteorite from the stars. He gave her back a normal life. The pixies gave him trust so fragile it could break with a loud voice. He gave them clothes, wings, and the confidence to fly into a demon lord's castle and introduce themselves. And Sophia gave him a silver ring and a whispered hope. He gave her back her health, her dignity, and the strength to stand up to the people who had caged her. Every trade Thor made was unequal, and he was always the one giving more. but that was exactly why everyone around him fought so hard to keep him safe. They knew something the Empire never understood. Thor wasn't weak because he couldn't fight. He was the most dangerous person in the world because he could make anyone around him stronger. A general who once tried to kidnap him now guarded his door. A chancellor who once suspected him now approved his wildest inventions without blinking. A princess who was supposed to be his enemy now wore his underwear and trusted him with her life. And a demon lord who had spent her entire reign hiding behind a mask took it off the moment she walked into his warehouse. Thor didn't conquer anything. He just made things, one item at a time, and the world rearranged itself around him. As he walked deeper into the cave that night, Mabel on his left, the pixies on his shoulders, and the demon lord's trust in his pocket, Thor wasn't thinking about revenge or glory. He was thinking about what to build next. A trading system that could feed both nations. A magic sword worthy of a girl who was braver than she believed. A way to connect to sisters separated by an empire that used them both. The catalog in his bag still had hundreds of pages he hadn't read yet. Every one of them was a problem waiting to be solved and a life waiting to be changed. Back in the Empire, the Duke sat in a cold tent on the southern front, stripped of his title, his mansion, and his pride. He still couldn't understand how a worthless son had brought down his entire house. He would probably never understand. Because the Duke measured worth in swords and spells, and Thor had never held either. What the Duke never saw was that Thor held something far more powerful. The ability to look at a broken thing and make it whole. A cracked pendant, a cold body, a burning girl, a scared ruler, a dying pixie, a caged princess. A divided world. Thor fixed them all the same way, not by swinging a blade, but by sitting down, studying the problem, and building something that had never existed before. That was creation alchemy. Not the worthless skill of a disgraced son. The most powerful force in the world. And the boy who wielded it was only getting started. In the quiet of the warehouse, long after the tea had gone cold and the pixies had fallen asleep in his jacket pocket, Thor opened the catalog one more time. He turned to a page he had bookmarked weeks ago. A device the heroes called a smartphone. A tool that could send a voice across any distance, connect people who had never met, and carry the knowledge of an entire civilization in the palm of your hand. He didn't know how to build it yet. He didn't even understand half the principles behind it. But he understood the need. Sophia needed to hear her sister's voice. Rookie needed to know what the Empire was planning before it was too late. Mabel needed to call for help if she was ever in danger. And the pixies needed a way to sing their forest songs to someone other than the trees. Thor closed the catalog, set it on the table, and smiled. Tomorrow, he would start researching. The day after that, he would start experimenting. And sometime after that, probably after a few spectacular failures and at least one accidental explosion, he would hold a working prototype in his hands. Because that was what Thor did. He looked at impossible things and said, "Give me the materials and I will figure it out." The Empire called him worthless because he couldn't destroy. The demon territory called him priceless because he could create. And somewhere between those two truths, a boy who was never supposed to matter was quietly rebuilding the world. Rookie Evergard, the demon lord who hid her face from the world, fell asleep that night holding a pillow shaped like the only person who had ever seen her, and called her beautiful. Agnes Risinga, the girl trapped inside fire-resistant armor for half her life, brushed her hair in front of a mirror wearing a cotton dress, crying because it didn't burn. Mabel, the elf maid who couldn't cast a single spell for 20 years, practiced wind magic in the garden until the flowers bent sideways. Solo, the pixie who couldn't fly, raced through the treetops in a white dress with ribbons trailing behind her like streamers. And Sophia, the princess who had been told her only purpose was to be a weapon, stood at a window watching the sunrise and feeling her own heartbeat without pain for the first time she could remember. All of them, every single one, had been called useless by someone. All of them had been told they didn't matter. And all of them had been proven wrong by a boy with no sword, no shield, and no combat magic. Just alchemy. Just the quiet, stubborn belief that if you understand how something is broken, you can figure out how to fix it. The cave ahead was dark, and the answers were still hidden somewhere in the depths. But Thor had a catalog, a team of people who believed in him, and an entire territory that was betting its future on his next invention. He had walked into the demon territory as a hostage with nothing but a stolen spoon. Now he walked into the unknown as Thor, the alchemist who proved that the most worthless skill in the Empire was the most valuable gift the world had ever seen. The spoon was still in his pocket. He kept it as a reminder. Not of what he had lost, but of what he had built from nothing. And he was far from finished.